And welcome to another episode of Nights at the Round Table. Tis your boy Manwell, and I am joined today with Taylor Hughes. What is up, Taylor?
Hey, man. Well, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Bro, thanks for coming on, man. Before we get into this, man, if you're watching or if you're on YouTube, please subscribe and like so you guys can get heads up when we do this thing. But I thought it was so interesting when my assistant hit me up and was like, "Yo, there's this guy Taylor who is a former pastor but now magician," and I was like, that segue is a little bonkers. So I was really just curious, like, A, where did you pastor at?
Yeah.
How did that start? And how did you get into what you do now?
Yeah. And first of all, my good friend Natalie listens to every episode and was like, you have to connect with what's going on here at night. So I'm so excited to crash the party.
Oh,
Thanks for having me.
good.
I got involved in church when I was real little. At the same time, I got involved doing magic tricks. Like I had a magic kit when I was 7 years old, and I just became obsessed with this idea of wonder and being able to encourage people that, like, hey, you don't have to have it all figured out. You can just kind of
Mhm.
enjoy the journey. And so I did magic shows growing up, and then was involved in, like, youth group and church leadership when I was a kid, and was just always like putting my hand up to volunteer and to help. And
Sure.
after a while, it was like, hey, we need someone to oversee the junior high ministry when I had gotten, in college. And I was like, okay, I'll do it until you find someone. And before I knew it, I spent 13 years on staff at a church,
Sheesh.
overseeing everything from, birth to college, and then getting involved with, like, the worship and media side of things. And
Mhm.
yeah, after a while, it was just one of those situations where I looked, and unfortunately, we were in a scenario where leadership there were some challenges going on and some things that it was just like, man, as a kid, I was always just like, hey, I just want to do what I feel like Jesus wants me to do. And at a
Yeah.
certain point, the best way I could keep doing what I felt like Jesus wanted me to do was to leave the place we were at. And yeah, so I resigned my position and joined the circus.
That's the wild thing, because I think most people don't really understand. And I always tell them because they're I think when you're like a audience member at a church, there's so many assumptions of like, this is how it goes down. Like, this is what's
Mm,
happening behind the scenes. Like, it's just like the Bible. And I always like to tell them, hey, I think nowadays church is a little bit more like a business that
mm,
incorporates faith into it more
yeah.
than a church that handles money. At least
Mm,
from what I've been able to see being behind the scenes from touring and just being a part of it for so long.
right.
Would you say that's kind of like accurate, at least in your position?
Yeah, I want to be careful that, like, I haven't been to every church environment. I
Right,
know
right,
there's
right.
I mean, there are 30,000 different Christian denominations. There's a lot of different ways to express your
Sure.
faith and worship and all of that.
Mhm.
But yeah, in the situation that I was at, I mean, I grew up in this place for from the time I was 8 years old. I was a member of this church, and then I spent 13 years on staff. So it was like
Mhm.
a good chunk of my life was spent in this place. And at a certain point, when you're a little kid, you don't know why decisions are made or what's
Sure.
happening. And then I noticed that even going on staff at a church, you don't always know why the decisions are being made. The same thing happens in business. We just go,
Right.
well, we don't know, but leadership obviously knows, and they're making decisions that are going to help everybody and support everyone. And we just need to trust them and have faith that they're making the right decisions. And then at a certain point, I got involved to the point where all of a sudden I was in those meetings that I was never in before. And you
Mhm.
start to see a little bit of kind of what's calling the shots.
Yeah.
And it was at that point where I was just like, oh, it wasn't even so much that what I believed or what I felt we were called to do changed. It was just seeing, like, oh, I don't think what we say and what we do, at least in this environment I was in, lines up. And so I'd rather just kind of step away and figure out a different way to yeah, to do that.
Yeah, and I think, the I think the hardest part when you do see behind the curtain is not letting it affect you or jade you in a sense of like, oh, everything that's happening is either malicious or
Mm,
it's easy for you to get the idea that if you were running things, you you would be able
right.
to do it better.
Yeah.
When I saw behind the scenes of what church was, I I immediately just switched to, "Oh, okay, but it's just humans. We're
Right.
doing a thing." And as we do things like usual, that ends up becoming sometime it gets muddy and sometimes you do things for the wrong reasons, but it never made me think that, "Oh, okay, this place is bad," but it just let me know like, "Oh, man, lower your expectations," because I think,
Mm.
there's disappointment up here and there's reality right here, and in between is disappointment.
Right.
So if
Yeah,
you can adjust
absolutely.
that expectation on what you get from a church,
Yeah.
which I have a whole different definition now in a physical sense what a church is for me.
Ooh, I'd love to hear it. Let's
Yeah,
hear it.
so, I mean, I've traveled and gone to so many churches, and I've moved a lot, so I've been able to be a part of different churches, and what I realized, like, the church I was saved in Orlando, which I love to this day, uh, but when I left there, I didn't really hear from anyone,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So and to this day, I don't really hear from anyone,
Yeah.
and I was like again, I didn't take that personally, I was just like, "Oh, man," something that I thought I was doing church, I think it was like a seasonal thing, and it was just doing church, and then
Mm.
I kept going to different churches, and it was just that typical me show up, I listen, I worship, I leave. A greeter will say hi if they have
Right.
a greeter ministry, but it's really just that, and when I
Mm.
left and went into the real world, there wasn't any more connection at that point. There wasn't
Right.
any, like, actual life living,
Mhm.
and that's just what I experienced, and again, it wasn't to be negative toward these churches, it was just more so, I think I have to develop what I saw in the Bible was the church, which was just people living in normal
Mm.
situations, not a building,
Mhm.
but truly functioning as believers and as family in normal life.
Right.
All
Right.
of this is spiritual.
Yes.
All of
Yeah.
this is church from, "Hey, can I help you cut your grass?" Or, "Hey, can I help you with the groceries?
Mhm.
Can I help pay for your kids' childcare?" Like, just normal, mundane,
Right.
non-spiritual stuff was doing church now, and
Yeah.
that's kinda where I exist now. I don't ever feel convicted, or I don't really feel bad when people are like, "Do you consistently go to church?" And I'm like,
Mm.
"No, I really don't. I live
Yeah.
in church now."
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, for me, when I was a professional believer, uh, the biggest challenge was that I was so busy running the program of church that I never was being the church,
Mhm.
like uh, I was the guy who'd get up on stage and would tell you like, "Hey, we've got this great thing going on. Come on out and be a part of it." And then I never saw my neighbors because I was just constantly at the building, and so
Mhm.
I think that some of that is just a byproduct of what we emphasize and what we make as the most important.
Yeah.
I think anytime you make the gathering of people into a certain space more important than what's taken out of that into the world, then people just go, well, if they're not here, they must be struggling with something, or
Right.
they'll come back, and when when we uh, when we were I remember trying to do like small groups, and it was always like, how do we get people in small groups? And then I realized one day, I'm like, everyone has a small group already.
Yep.
Everyone's got a community. You got your friends, you got the people you see at the barbershop, you got your next door neighbor, you got the parents at your kid's school. Like everybody's got relationship.
Mhm.
And one of the challenges I think is that uh, as a church, we can kind of go like, hey, let's get everybody to come to this place, and then we'll put them in a new group, rather than going, how can we empower people and encourage them just to love the people that are already in their life? So,
Yeah, that's
um,
good. That's good because that is the thing, right? Get them all to come here
mm,
because here is where Jesus is at, as
mm,
opposed to saying, "They're already there." Like, you're
yeah,
already in a growing of a church, like, this what you
mm,
got going on, these 4 or 5 people that you whether it's at work or whether it's your neighbors or whatever, like, this can be a church, and
right,
you just have to be the person to bring them together, and usually that exists in love, like, at least for me, because when I was pro-Christian, it was definitely I was, professional Christian, sorry,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean pro anti-Christian,
Oh no,
um
I gotcha.
I was super hardcore, like, I was out witnessing, I was on the streets, and I was that guy,
Yeah,
and then, I never really had any conversion, and it wasn't for lack of scripture, because I had so
yeah,
much scripture to throw at people,
right,
but it was more so that I bypassed their life and where they were at now
Yeah.
just so that I can give them what I thought was the most important thing that they needed. Because that's the
Right.
teaching. And I know deep down we believe, yes, Jesus is the most important thing. But in somebody's life, A, that doesn't know Jesus, B, that has real world problems,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
Real world, I can't eat, my kids don't have clothes, like real world problems.
Yeah.
To me, it felt more authentically Jesus to address those real world problems
Yeah,
first
I mean,
and
that's
foremost.
what we see in the stories, right? That's what you see in the scripture of Jesus. He was like on his way somewhere and someone interrupted him, and that became the mission. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, someone needs something, let's take care of that. Yeah. Yeah, I've always struggled a little bit with I saw you guys did a conversation recently on hell, which is like a big
Yeah,
heavy topic in the church. And I think the thing that I struggle with, regardless of what you think is going to happen someday, uh, undeniably, there are people right now who are experiencing hellish conditions,
right.
and I think, like you said, when you're kind of being like that young, passionate, I got to tell people about Jesus because we're afraid of what's going to maybe happen to them someday. We're forgetting that we have the opportunity right now, and this is what I see in the story of Jesus. Like, he did it right there. It wasn't like someday, like right
Right.
now. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. Like,
Mhm.
let's help someone right now, so that we help them not experience
Isn't
that
that such a
in the
weird way
moment.
of thinking of things? It's like you're living for a future that you don't even know, like, what it is, what it looks like. You have an idea. Like, our idea of hell is, I feel, was more influenced by Dante's Inferno and
Mm,
every and a lot of other religions who also have a Satan character in their religions.
yeah.
Um, we've been influenced by it, and now we're, like, living, judging,
Mm,
like, oppressing people based on a future that we all can only hope is a certain thing. Like, we
mm,
hear streets of gold, we hear, but I literally, to this day, and I've been saying for a long time, I couldn't even draw you a picture of what I really thought heaven was. I have an
right.
idea,
Mm,
but even that idea, I'm like, this is such a 50-50. I don't know
yeah.
what it is, but what I do know is, like, what you're saying. Like, I'm living in a
Mm,
very real world right now, and I have the ability to help
yeah.
people right now.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's the most
It's
important
like,
thing. I was studying these rabbis, and they were saying, like, hell for them wasn't it wasn't this fire, it wasn't this whatever. It was the brutal understanding of all that you could have done in life, but you didn't do.
mm, yeah, like,
So
you missed out on the opportunity when it was
yeah.
right in front of you. Yeah.
So the anguish of that is hell.
Mhm.
And when I said that, even when I first heard it, I was like, "Well, that doesn't seem, like, scary." Like, that doesn't seem at all like I should fix my life for that. And
Right.
then he which, coincidentally, the interviewer said the same thing. He was like, "Well,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem scary, so why would anybody choose,
Right.
Jesus?"
Right.
And he was like, "Well, think about suicide, or,
Mm,
think about taking one's life. Do most people choose that road because of something that happened to them physically, or
mm,
because of what's happening in their minds?" And I was just like, "Dang, you're
mm,
so right." Most of what happens in the mind, and
mm.
then it formulates how you see what's happening in reality. So you may think nobody loves you, even though there's a whole family that's behind you, and I love you. If you
Right.
need me, reach out. But your mind
Yeah.
is telling you, no one is there. I'm alone.
Yeah.
And so the battlefield happens up here. So
Mhm.
his point was, this is the worst. This can turn your life into heaven or hell.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was blown away by that idea. It, like,
Right.
reframed the way I looked at everything.
Mhm.
So, I mean,
That's fascinating. That's a really good way to look at it.
yeah,
And the fact that when you look at, okay, if your desire is to help other people and people are suffering with mental health issues and they're struggling with physical pain, you know, when you're dealing with something that is so huge like that, it's all you can see. You're not thinking about the future.
right,
You're not thinking about 5 years from now. You're definitely not thinking about eternity.
right,
And yet we put all this emphasis on, hey, everything's going to be better when you're gone, you know, as opposed to what can I do to make things a little bit better today? And
right.
I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive. Like,
Sure.
if if your conviction is that like we need to help people be secure for eternity, then yeah, it'd be wrong for you not to do everything you could to help people in that way. However, don't step over the need today in an effort to try to like save
Sell them
somebody
on the
from
future. Right.
possible pain down the road. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so when you ended up transitioning out, like, what was that period like? Because I don't know about you, but I mean, I guess I was in the I was like, I had an excuse of why I was gone from church so much because I was touring. So usually if I'm touring, I'm at a show on
Right. And
Sunday.
people ask, where
Somebody
do you
else
go to
is
church? And you're like, oh, I'm on the road all the
I'm
time.
out
And
there serving Jesus
right.
24/7.
Right.
But when I stopped doing it
Mm,
and I found myself on this side of things, a large part of me felt like when I walked away what I would call systematic Christianity, like,
mhm.
the mainstream idea of what it meant to do these things,
Yeah.
I found myself kind of, like, scared because I was like, "Oh, no." I used to have a church that gave me my walls
Right.
or or politely put me into the box that they
Mhm.
put everyone else in, and so I knew my limits.
Mm.
Now I'm out here in the real world talking about Jesus is everywhere, and I could find him anywhere, and the church is here now outside of every wall.
Mm.
And now I'm forced to find my own walls or build my own safety nets because it's not like you
Yeah.
can just live like a hooligan. It's like you have to start building your own fortress of like, "All right, can't go there. I gotta be
Yeah.
smart. Like, I can't go there. I have freedom, but I can't go there." So
Right.
what did that look like for you from being, like, so invested
Mm.
in the church system to now you're on your own?
Yeah, I think that I heard someone describe it once like your beliefs and the kind of like those here's who I am, here's what I'm about, this is what I'll do, this is what I won't do. It's kind of like when you first move into your first apartment. Like you remember your first apartment you ever
Mhm.
had
Yeah, yeah.
and the furniture that you had was like, it was like an old couch you found on the
And
side of the
yeah,
road and you're like, I'll flip the cushion over. It's not that gross. And then like
yeah.
you had like something got passed down to you from your grandma, and then you had those dishes that, someone was throwing away. And so you get to a point like when you first start jumping out in the world where you look around, you go like, oh, all these beliefs that I have that I say are mine. So many of them have been like borrowed and stolen
Yeah.
and passed down and placed upon you from other people. And so I think there's an initial for a lot of people who are, and the word deconstruction gets a weird,
Sure.
it's a loaded thing. But
Mhm.
I think about like, hey, if you're going to remodel, you got to have demo day. Like
Yeah.
there's a time where it's like, we got to get all this stuff out so we can figure out what we're putting in.
Yep.
And I think for me, a lot of that was like, okay, let's clear out. There's like a season where I'm like, I don't even know what I believe anymore because everything that I have been taught has been attached to a place that
Mm.
then when it all hit the fan was not there for me,
Mm. Yeah.
like, and so for a minute you kind of like move, like, get all the furniture out of here. Let's just clear the space. And then you
Right.
start going, well, that one I really like. I'm going to put that back in. And this one doesn't really serve me. So I'm going to go find another one that connects with me more and helps me love people more. So
Yeah.
I think that there is for everybody when they step away from an environment that maybe wasn't the most life-giving for them, or maybe for a time was, and then it started to take away. There is that moment where you kind of go like, okay, who is it that I want to be? And what is it that I want my life to be about? And so I think it's very beyond natural. I think it's necessary to have kind of a clearing of those parameters,
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I
so
mean,
a
that's
lot of
that's beautiful right there how you just said it.
I think a lot of time people will look. I mean, I'll just say I'll speak from my perspective. When I was a pastor and people would leave, I'd go like, they're just hurt. They'll
Yeah,
be
yeah,
back.
yeah,
They'll be back,
yeah.
right? As opposed to, when you see an image in scripture of like somebody hurting, it's like Jesus, the good shepherd, he's going to go after the one who is lost, and
Mhm.
and we're just like, they'll find their way back
Yeah.
if they're a real believer.
Yeah, yeah. Or we'll
So
have a lot of negative things to say about I mean, the
yeah,
amount of times I heard the term backsliding, and I was like, "I still have yet to find this in the Bible," but
it's
it's
not
something
there.
we really we really holding on to, and I mean, I think, man, you said it so simple and so eloquently, like, because we called it remodeling too, because I do real estate on the side, and I'm like,
Yeah,
there's no way to know, like, what you have and what's working and what's not, if the
right.
electrical's old or if the pipes need new. Like, I think with the idea of deconstruction, I think the reason it's a trigger, like, most political, this would what I would consider a spiritual political term. So
Yeah.
where it divides people really quickly because they immediately look at the extremes of each thing. So when you hear
Right.
deconstruction, you think of the extremes. You think of somebody who doesn't love the Bible, doesn't love God. They just want to be out here living how they want to live.
Right.
And for most of us that are going through it or have done it, it's really like what you said. It is a nice remodel of, all right, what is working in this house and what is not?
Yes.
Where did I buy from cheap,
Mhm.
places, and what do I need to replace with good quality stuff to make this house work, you know?
Right.
And I
When you
think
grow
that's beautiful.
oh, man, you're spot on. I mean, when you grow up, you kinda don't have like, a kid doesn't have political beliefs when they're 4 years
Right,
old,
right.
but they hear what their parents say. And they don't have religious beliefs when they're teeny tiny. They just you enter into a worldview that you didn't build, right?
Mhm, mhm.
All of us do. We're just born into a situation. Some of us are born into a situation where there is no belief in God, and people find that later, and sometimes it's the other way around.
Right.
But I think about it like when I was a kid, my dad's always loved classic cars. Like he had a
Oh, me too.
1954 Chevy when I was
Oof,
like little.
yeah.
And I mean, we had like 9 different, not at the same time. He would like buy them, sell them, trade them. Like, at one point we had like, we've had 9 different classic cars growing up. We never had a Ford because my dad just loved Chevys. He just
Mm,
loved Chevys. We would go to the car show or the swap meet, and he'd be like, "Come, let me show you this one." And because he loved Chevys, he taught me about Chevrolets.
right.
Like I could tell you any Chevy from the 50s, I could tell you what year it is by the tail light because when I was a kid, my dad thought it was so important for me to see that information, and his love for that thing made me retain it, right?
Mm,
And then I realized years later, like I had this attitude of like, oh, Fords are terrible. Fords are awful. And then I drove like a couple Fords and I'm like, hey, some of these are pretty great.
yeah, yeah.
And all I knew is that my dad hated Fords and he loved Chevys. And so I adopted that belief without ever exploring for myself that, yeah, Chevys are great, but there's also some great things about Fords. And I
Mm,
think we do the same thing with our political views, with our religious views, where we like join a team,
yeah,
it's like, I mean, if sports is great, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, I mean, to have a team where we're just like, we're the best always. Now the team's always changing,
right, right.
right?
Yeah,
It's different players, different plays, but we're just like, these are our guys and they're our guys. Well, no, these are the guys that we paid to come here and will leave
right,
us,
right.
but we can kind of do the same thing with our political views and our spiritual views where we just adopt whatever was handed to us. And then the question is it deconstruction what you believe, or is it really for the first time thinking about what you believe and owning it? I think that's
Yeah.
kind of beautiful.
It's a thinking on your own process. It's like the first
Yeah.
time that you've actually stopped and said, "Why?" And
Right.
it's funny because, most people or I guess traditional church-going people will consider the questioning, a bad thing because it means
Right.
that you have doubt. It means that you're somehow unsure of your faith. And I used to think that the more I can consider myself being right, the
Mhm.
more certain I was in my faith because I'm learning so much,
Mm.
so I know more. I know more, and now I'm certain.
Yeah.
But then life has this funny way of just teaching me that I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And I think the most beautiful part of my deconstruction and reconstruction would
Mm.
be that I no longer desire to be right.
Yeah.
Because with being right and being staunch and being so, like,
Mhm.
so whatever, certain, then now you carry the obligation, now you carry the weight
Right.
of needing to be factual in everything that you are and say. So if somebody proves you wrong, you're gonna
Right.
get everyone just slamming on you like, "Oh, I thought you knew. I thought you
Yeah.
were right." And
Yeah.
so that's happened to me a couple times. Nobody came and slammed on me. I slammed on myself, and I realized, man, it's not worth, sticking so tight or so hard to a certain point when there's so many other things that it could be. So I
Right.
lost the idea of being right, and I welcomed the mystery of Jesus and the mystery of the gospel,
Mhm.
I was just having a conversation with my boy yesterday, and we were talking about, which is interesting. We were talking about adultery,
Hmm.
and I always thought it was interesting in the Jewish culture that most of the times, if not all of the times, the men never got in trouble for adultery. It was
Hmm.
the women that got in trouble. So when the woman was gonna be stoned and Jesus came in,
Right.
spoke to
Yeah.
all the men and was like, "Which one of you? Cast the first
Hmm.
stone if you don't have no sin."
Yeah.
But none of those people was crying for the dude that she
Mm.
had, that she slept with.
Interesting.
And culturally speaking, it was usually the woman that was punished for it. And
Huh.
so when we were talking about adultery, I was like, "Man, I really think that adultery meant something different back then than it did like how we
Hmm.
use it today." Like when we say it
Interesting.
now in America, it's very specific. But back
Right.
then it had different language, a different category. It was just different.
Hmm.
And I didn't land on an answer because I'm waiting to go back and study it to see what it
Yeah.
is, just to study the idea of language and a Jewish perspective so that I can
Right.
really reframe the way I look at this book and how I move forward, because
Yeah.
that really was important to me too. I realized I'm reading this from an American point of view, and
Right.
this is a Jewish book.
Yeah.
So, if I don't know Jewish ways of looking at things, then I
Right.
cannot accurately put this into my life right now.
Yeah. That's so good. I love that idea of, I mean, one question I like to ask people is what was the last thing you changed your mind about?
Mm,
You know, I think
mm,
as a kid, you learn to tie your shoes. And do you remember, like, even if you can't remember learning yourself, if you've ever watched a kid learning to tie their shoes,
right,
the amount of intensity with every movement and the frustration and the struggle and feeling like I'm never going to get this.
right.
I'm never going to get this. And yet at one point we all, like today, we put our shoes on, we tied them. We didn't think twice about it. You didn't even think you're probably doing two other things while you're tying your shoes,
Yeah,
because we've now put that tying shoes in the category of knowing. We've got it down, we know it, so we're never going to think about it again. And
yeah,
I think people do that spiritually where they go, well, this is what the pastor said. Now I know it. I'm going to put that in the knowing category. And we don't open ourselves up to any other perspectives or ideas. And I just think that, as a kid learning magic tricks, the thing that attracted me to magic, and the reason I use magic as a metaphor when I speak now, is that there's something beautiful about showing someone something that they don't understand.
mm,
Because we live in a world where we have instant access to all information.
yeah,
Like we have forgot what it feels like to not know something because we don't sit in it. We just immediately Google, right?
yeah,
And so when you can show somebody something that they don't understand, it like flips a switch in our brains where we go like, oh, maybe there's some other things that I don't understand. And so for me, like when you talk about not feeling like you have to have it all figured out, that is beautiful, man. Like I feel like there is so much in scripture about awe and wonder and reverence and like being amazed at God. And I think anytime people start to go like, we've got the lock on who God is, like, this book that people have been fighting about for thousands of years and was
mhm,
written over all this time by all these different people, we finally cracked the code.
right.
So just listen to what we say and do it, and it's all going to work out. you
Right.
know
I laugh about that all the time. I'm like, "Guys, like, really?" And this was the conversation I was having with them. I was like, I "You have to at least admit that all of your study, all
Mm,
of your learning is so far removed from the time that it actually took place, that at
right,
least come to the agreement
right,
that we are all 50-50 right and wrong.
right.
All we have is best guess, and I'll get fight on that, but when I ask a couple more questions, you can tell me all that you have learned, and then if I ask you,
Yeah,
"Hey, but are you 1,000% that your interpretation is fully without error?"
yeah,
And no one has been able to say yes, because they wouldn't, because
right.
in reality, all we have are really good guesses.
Yeah,
So if that's gonna be the fact, then why not why not be more humble in this idea of this book? And that's kind of like the stance I've took. I'm like, "All right, cool."
yeah,
Whenever I have conversations with people, I start with, "Hey, do you believe you're 1,000% correct and there's no error in your interpretation of this book?" "No."
yeah,
"Okay, me either." So from
yeah,
here on out, we're novices.
Yeah.
We're just novices having a conversation about a book that we think is cool.
Right.
And moving
Right.
forward, that kind of takes the ego and the pride out of everything. Thanks so much, y'all, for listening to part 1 of this episode. We appreciate it greatly. Hey, like and subscribe if you guys are feeling this. Share it with your friends. We appreciate it so much. Please come back next week for part 2. Love you.